And do you remember the steps from 1965 to the founding of the first institute?
I do. I gave a lecture on teaching the violence of the Holocaust at Gratz College, Philadelphia, and published it in a Jewish educator's journal, Jewish Education. But more importantly, I gathered together a group of colleagues from a variety of professions. A couple of Christian ministers, a rabbi, president of a college, psychologist, psychiatrist, educators, sociologist, a director of theater, and with zero budget, with zero practical end-gaining goals, we created a study group. We met once a month regularly at my office. Each time one or two guys, gals would present a seminar discussion, and we would all learn together. For example, the one that I did was with the director of theater. And the question we raised is, how do you make it more possible for people to bear listening, reading, maintaining their attention to news of atrocities? The normal attention span is short, and then comes a cutout, because it's unbearable. That's what we worked on. I did that for a few years. Then the American Orthopsychiatric Association invited me to become chairman of something called a task force on mental health aspects of aggression, violence, and war. And that meant at every annual meeting, I was authorized to invite a fair number of outstanding scholars from the various fields to present, and I invited the people I wanted to learn from. We had one session after another. One year I had the privilege of bringing a talk from an Israeli psychiatrist who, together with his wife, psychologist, had been the two mental health people who conducted a formal examination of Eichmann while he was in prison. There's also a funny story I can tell quickly. He would disappear from his office at Tel HaShomer Hospital, and people started asking, where is Shlomo? Shlomo Kulchar, Hungarian Israeli psychiatrist. We don't know. Week after week, he was going to Eichmann. Finally, somebody said, don't you know? He's being called out to take care of the old man. They meant by that David Ben-Gurion, that he was secretly treating him, which he wasn't. When I moved to Israel, I planned to work on the psychology of genocide. I spent 10 years writing a book called How Can We Commit the Unthinkable, published by Westview Press. It includes chapters on perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. What I did is I took months where every day I'd wake up, no telephone calls, no work, and I would do a Stanislavski psychodrama. I played the role in my head of a victim in the Holocaust. I put myself in scene after scene of the victim's experiences. When that period was over, I moved to the bystander role. And for a good number of months, I stood and watched and saw what they were doing to the inmates. And then came the months devoted to putting on a Nazi uniform in my head and the boots and being an SS perpetrator. And I did it step after step. During that period, I had one anxiety attack after another, which I accepted as part of the price for meeting up with that part of potential in my personality, in a human personality. The book also has a chapter which introduced for the first time the concept of a genocide early warning system. I wrote that chapter with my colleague Hanan Rappaport, who was then the director of the Zold National Institute for Research in the Behavioral Sciences in Jerusalem. Hanan and I met probably for 7 years, every Sunday, a nice chicken dinner that his wife would prepare, and then we worked for 4 or 5 hours into the evening until we got it. I was now in business. The book was finished, it was accepted for publication. I had just finished organizing and leading an international family therapy conference, Back to Psychotherapy, and I decided I wanted to organize a first international conference on the Holocaust and genocide. We're in 1979 now. Conference is slated for 1982. We started with no list of professionals. There was nobody in the world in any organized way, in any organization. We assembled them, the people who had conveyed interest in various aspects of Holocaust and genocide. We worked on that for 3 years. It's during those years that we incorporated the Institute on the Holocaust and Genocide legally in Israel. The 3 founders were my colleague, psychiatrist, who was director of Shalvata Psychiatric Center, Shammai Davidson, who was a devoted therapist for Holocaust survivors, Elie Wiesel, and myself. We're the 3 signatories. We're headed for the conference. In 1982, Amnesty International, which I believe quite recently at that point had been awarded the Nobel Prize after its questionable, shaky beginnings, was headed by a fine man called Martin Ennals. Martin Ennals wanted Amnesty to take on not only prisoners of conscience, but the subject of genocide. He invited the 3 living people who had written books on genocide by 1982. Irving Lewis Hurwitz, president of and publisher of Transaction Books, Leo Cooper, professor of sociology, University of California, a South African in origin, and myself to a conference in Amsterdam. Amnesty declined to take on genocide. Martin Ennals, who had led them to the Nobel Prize, resigned and took on the development of a totally new organization under the tutelage of Leo Cooper. The organization was called International Alert, and it was to alert to the scourge of genocide. I come back to Israel from Amsterdam. The chairman of my department at Tel Aviv University meets me and says, "Boy, are you in trouble?" I say, "Why?" He says, "Come on, I'll tell you." The Jerusalem Post ran a story in April 1982 about the forthcoming First International Conference on the Holocaust and Genocide, and told that the conference will be devoted to the Holocaust and any number of other genocides, name them, including the unmentionable for certain people, the Armenian genocide. All hell broke loose. Turkey made representations to Israel. You can't do this. Israel, as has been her wrong policy for many years, went along with Turkey in the interests of the realpolitik of maintaining relationships with Turkey, and brought pressure on me to remove the 6 lectures on the Armenian genocide out of 300 that were scheduled. We're now in April. The conference is scheduled for June. Shammai, Eli Wiesel stood with me. We absolutely refused. The Israeli government increased the pressure enormously through the university on me. Tel Aviv University was supposed to be one of the co-sponsors. The rector pulled out. Through contacting everybody who was on the preliminary program we had published, which was a large number of people, 300 lectures, contacting them all around the world, saying the Israeli government wishes that you not attend this conference. I refused to yield to that pressure. Eli Wiesel resigned as the president of the conference, but he accompanied it with giving an interview to the New York Times in Paris, where he told the story. I was not allowed to tell the story because it included threats by Turkey against Jewish lives in Turkey. People were coming to Israel through Turkey, and I couldn't tamper with that. Eli told the story. The New York Times then called me, and I answered in my kitsch way, the conference will go on even if we have only 10 attendees. The government pulled out Yad Vashem where we were supposed to begin. We instead opened at the Hilton Hotel. Our opening speaker disappeared, as did about 35% of the key leaders I had designated for the conference. But everybody else held on. We opened at the Hilton Hotel. I gave a full briefing of the background story. By then, the New York Times had covered the story with 6 or 7 stories. We opened, and now the Israeli press, which had been subject to censorship, came into the picture. They knew what was going on. They reported, and there were many editorial columns supporting us, which led to my boss, rector at Tel Aviv University, becoming infuriated because they criticized him and they praised us for what we were doing. The conference was a milestone event. It's been written up in the academic literature as a significant event in academic freedom. I went broke in the process. Israel had pulled out the monies. For example, I had one check from a foundation in New York for $10,000. And for those who know Israeli life in those days, I had gone to the bank, deposited it to our account, and you then had to wait several weeks for it to get cleared. By time the clearing was supposed to take place, the Israeli government had gotten the donor to cancel the gift. We didn't have money. The Congress organizer, Kenneth, in Tel Aviv, was beautiful. Pitched in, gave us free coffee, reduced prices here and there. The Hilton cost a few $1,000s a day. We went ahead, we made it. I survived the cancellation of many of my insurance policies because I didn't have money left. We made it through. I got the money back. We now opened the Institute on the Holocaust and Genocide. End of beginning story.